Hello, everybody. I'm back. Gonna work on another podcast today, and what I was thinking was I was actually gonna go back and do some read alouds from my very first podcast, from my very first blog post when I was just beginning, and that was all the way back in 2016. So I just realized today because Jason took away the date sorting thing on the side, so I couldn't just go to the oldest blog post. So I was like, how do I figure out like how old this blog post is? So I was going through, and there's about I don't know, maybe 300 blog posts, and I think it's going to be interesting to sort of revisit my starting point. And I would say that like my activism started probably about 2014, 2015. The year really ramped up after the school closures, and I started to make the connections between the standardized testing and the school closures and what we should do about it. And that's where I was at that point in time. Now, I will sort of frame this that my understanding of the field of public education is very different than when I initially started. I know it's a lot more complicated, and I attended public schools in a pretty affluent Southern community. And, we never had the challenges that were experienced when I was raising my child, or, my husband and I were raising our child in the Philadelphia public schools, which are tremendously underfunded. And really, it was set up as this vastly competitive environment between neighborhood schools, magnet schools, charter schools, religious schools, private schools, homeschooling, unschooling. Like, it was a tremendous manufactured scarcity of resources, even to the point that the kids were only getting maybe $10 a year for all their school supplies, like all the paper, all the books, everything, that parents would have to crowdfund just so the kids could have like a set of class novels to read in class. Now they don't even have class novels, right? Everything's on a Chromebook or an iPad. But that's sort of where we were. It was a very different experience, my growing up experience in sort of a suburban setting that had resources, and then raising our child in a district that very much didn't. And for me, it was a big eye opener because even in the city, it's still very segregated. It's the redlining, the histories. There aren't a ton of opportunities for people of different backgrounds to mix it up. And that was what came out of the public school activism for me, because everybody cares about their kids. You may have different philosophies about how you care about them, but, people are very intentional about their families. And so I was able to, through stepping out and trying to learn about what was going on and take a role in it, I met a lot of different amazing people who have very different backgrounds and very different stories from mine, that I was grateful for. So that's where I was in 14, 15, 16. I started my blog. I used to be with an organization called the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools. And, good-hearted people, unfortunately, like they just couldn't come with me to the next phase of looking into impact finance. And they were kind of spinning around in an older story of what was going on. But now I see that within the school construct, and you'll see in these blog posts, I realized back then, this is 2016, that the plan was actually to disassemble public education altogether and then push it into this decentralized data harvesting individual learning agent program. And that eventually the public schools would be intentionally taken apart, but then the swap out would be school choice, and then the school choice would be tied to this cybernetic construct with the blockchain and the prescribed vouchers and the data verification and the skills badges and the social emotional learning skills badges. None of that was going to go away under school choice. It was just going to change where it was delivered and where the data was acquired. And so when I got to that point, I was like, hey, we should not be fighting each other. Like, they want all of the parents pointing that, like, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. And I'm like, no, guys, like, and that's still happening out there in social media. Everyone thinks they've got the answer, but they don't actually realize that the plan is to make everybody's kids put their brains in robots and compete against each other for bottom wages so that the AI can mirror their mind into the metaverse and create the singularity. Like, if we all actually got on that program, like, we could realize that we've just been had. Like, it's a total game. And I had some outreach for someone who was working with the teachers union, and I said, listen, like, this is where I'm at. Like, if you look at my material at the beginning, I was very much an advocate for public schools and teachers. I've actually been really disappointed over the past, over the past 2.5 years, over what happened in the schools and the role that teachers unions and teachers played, and what happened in terms of, in my opinion, creating manufactured trauma of children that will have really grave repercussions and feed into the social impact agenda, which we are seeing now in mental health screenings. Because I heard from someone today that in New Jersey, they're doing all sorts of really invasive mental health questionnaires on kids. And even when parents are asserting like not to have their kids do these questionnaires, and even though legally they're not obligated, the teachers, they just lean on the kids anyway, and they just tell them to do it. So that's all hanging out there. So anyway, so I thought I would read two of my earliest blog posts, and like, surprise, surprise, like now I'm into like, most of my posts end up being like 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 words. These are really petite. So I'm going to read two and like just have a little commentary for food for thought. And then if you want to hang out with me a little bit longer, my friend Deepti in Goa, India, like, she is a wonderful consultant on so many things, life consultant and perspective. And so she had been telling me about the Bhagavad. This is so bad. I'm bad at Ojibwe and Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita. I don't know why my mouth doesn't work that way. I can read it easily. I just can't say it. So she had given me this, I guess it's a translated synopsis, translated into English by Ramananda Prasad. And she said a lot of people over there read it, and that there's a lot of good lessons, like in terms of sort of grounding your structure and your thinking about engaging in this, what do we say? We don't want to be too adversarial about it, but the challenges that we face, like there's lots of good historical legacies about that we can put into good use. So I'm going to start to read that because look, it's not that long. So I'm going to read the introduction, and then for the back to school crowd, I'm going to start this book called Feed, which is by M.T. Anderson. And it's actually sort of like an epistolary novel, but the heroine is actually a homeschool student who messes up the data trail on her, like, to sort of devastating consequences down the road. Hey, kid. Well, I'll own that. I know a lot about it. This was my thing. Like, when I started, I was like, this is not right about education. Something is not right. And I was still very naive about the world, like, not that we could make it fair. I wasn't really prepared the fact that things were unfair on purpose, because I led a pretty sheltered life, honestly. Like, that's where I'm at. And so that was my part of my learning curve. But it was actually the perfect training, because I was able to, through my acclimation to the activism space, to understanding like the leaders who are propped up in the space, to the idea of how people are managed into certain sort of identity politics boxes, and how they create the problem to give you the solution, and to sort of see how the public narrative is managed. Like, that was all incredibly helpful. And then in the end, the ed tech that I was so concerned about at the time, which was around, at that time, like privacy and the amount of money that people were making, which was really just the tiniest initial layer of the problem with ed tech, is that through the wearables and the competency badges, they want to mirror all of that into these digital twins for the AI, right? And so, and they want all of it. That's why you're seeing all of the social emotional learning, and the skills and the diversity, equity, inclusion. Not because those things aren't good, or because children shouldn't learn how to be, well-rounded people and learn to, be kind to others. But because it's all turning into a global hedge fund market attached to AI and machine learning. And that's really, really bad. So there we are. So I'm going to get started. I will just sort of say to begin with, so I'm going to record this because a couple people have asked me to reread my blogs aloud. And I thought initially that I wasn't sure if it was worthwhile, but I think because like I've been contacted by more people who are seeing this in their schools, things that I was talking about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, that it would be great to read them, and I could maybe revisit what I think about them now. And then people who had material, they can, in the comments section, like, bring up things that they're seeing in their communities and chime in, and we can see how it's actually playing out. So I will just get started. And I will say, just because I have a soapbox at the moment to all of you people out there, which is not a lot of people, but I want to say, so I've been off of Twitter for, I guess, since July, like a little over a month. And, it, I appreciate, even though, yes, this is Google. We're all like, I'm going to have a really great digital twin. This is feeding all of the nonsense stuff that's out there. But I found that the algorithmic engagement stuff is, even if you tried to sort of step back and not fully engage, which was my situation on Twitter. I didn't follow anyone. I had a few people that I would check in on just to see, like, on their pages, manually, but it wasn't algorithmic. And then increasingly I was feeling like, because I had initially a large group of people who were following me when I was speaking more on the lockdown issues. There were many people following me who it didn't really make sense, at least how they represented themselves visually or in their tweets or in their feeds, that they would necessarily be interested in the kind of stuff I was talking about. And that increased. And so, I had like 20,000 followers, and I was like knocking people off because, ultimately these algorithms can profile you based on who follows you, even if it's not a match. Like, even if the people following you aren't necessarily a match for how you see the world, that mirror effect mirrors through. And so increasingly, and I would block people. Like, I would block people around blockchain, like, if that was your thing, like, because I wasn't here to convince you to my point of view. Like, I wasn't going to spend my psychic energy is really invested in being the scout. I mean, that's not a great word, but being the person who's running ahead and scanning the territory and trying to figure out what's happening and making sense of diverse ideas, and then bringing them back and figuring out how to articulate them in a meaningful way. And that takes a lot of work. And there's not a whole lot of people doing that. There's a lot of people who are managing mainstream or even alt mainstream narratives. But people who are really like running out and saying, okay, let's talk about radioactive nuclear isotopes. Like, let's talk about biohybrid materials. Let's see how this is fitting into a thermodynamic economy. Like, that's not really happening. And that's not something like professional journalists are going to do because they're paid to not do it. And that's not something the academics are going to do because they're paid to not do it. And, and the people who are the most impacted by these harmful policies aren't going to do it because they're just trying to live. And so weirdly, like, I left my job last fall. And, I think I said this yesterday, but I was like, they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to try to save the world from nanotechnology. I'm going to do my best. And so that's what I've been doing. And like, I did not use Twitter the way a lot of people use it. And I think it honked a lot of people off because they were just like, well, how dare you cut me out? Or how dare you this? Or how dare you that? And I guess, like, in retrospect, based on recent lessons, it probably would have been better not to engage in that space at all than to think that I could set my own terms and that they would be respected, like, as, especially among, this is the ironic thing of the people in the resistance movement, the freedom movements, is they're very picky about other people not doing it the way they want to do it. So, like, you would think that if you were with the freedom movement, you would just respect that other people have different ways of doing it, but that's not the case. So, bouncing off the podcast that I did yesterday. So I'm doing this here live, but I have like a little recordy thing, and I'm doing, oh shoot. Oh, it fell off. I'm doing a little recording thing. Hopefully it's still working. For this, I'm going to try to do it as a podcast, too, like audio. So I did one yesterday, and this is my second one today. And one I did yesterday, like, essentially, it's really interesting because people's takeaways, I had like a really heartfelt, laying out of sort of where I was on an issue that's really hard and vulnerable, and people like in my reflection of it, and you guys can listen to it and tell me what you think, like, actually a very measured and reflective and thoughtful approach to essentially a difficult situation. And people are like, oh, she's just so unstable. Like, oh, we just don't like her because she blocks people and she's unstable and we don't like her. And these aren't people who know me. These aren't people who know me at all. And I'm okay because I'm actually very confident that I'm doing the work that I'm put here to do. Like, I'm actually doing this work, and it's not easy, but it's satisfying. I have a small group of people that I work with. It's getting smaller all the time to do this work. So I'm just trusting that even if this is the stupid Google platform, which many people like shake their hand, this is how we started. This is like, you can trace my trajectory all the way back, like all the way back to 2016 when I was like showing up at the school board meetings, and you can see me and you can see my evolution and how far I've come, because we can all evolve. We can all, get there. And yeah, so I'm here and I'm going to assume if you're here and you're watching now or you're watching later, it's because you're interested in how I think, which is a little different, honestly. Like the way my brain works and thinks about things is different than a lot of people's, but I actually think it's important. Like we all have the jobs to do. So anyway, I would just say if you see things floating around about me, just trust your gut and look and see what you know about me and then judge for yourself, because that's I think that's the most important thing. And just know that I'm very comfortable in the skin that I'm in, doing the work that I'm doing, even though it seems like insanity, the stuff that I have to try to figure out how to explain to people, because it seems so amazingly unreasonable and goes against so many things that we've been taught, which again goes back to school and conditioning. Okay, so I'm gonna just read this out, and then on the video later, I'll put. Oh, I guess I can put it in the comments. I never did this before. Let me see. Okay, so this is the first one I'm gonna do. Haha! Look at that. Okay, and then this is the second one I'm gonna do, and I'll talk about them. These are from 2016. All right. Okay. All right. I'm all new at this. Like usually Jason does all of my production-y stuff, and I'm trying to get a little bit more self-contained on this. So, okay. So let me see about moving this over. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So this is my first blog post. It's called Digital Curriculum Questions Parents Should Be Asking. And it is from September 10th, 2016. So that's almost, what, six years ago? Yeah. So you can see how far I've come. Okay. So as we enter this new era of blended/hybrid classrooms, so that's all the stuff that rolled out under lockdown, right? Like the hybrid learning, or like going to school for a few days and then go home. Like this is all the stuff that was coming, that was being planned for, that we didn't know about, but that we knew was coming. So as we enter this era of blended/hybrid classrooms, the clamor of edtech entrepreneurs pitching their digital curricula is getting to be truly overwhelming for parents. So much edtech. Rather than critiquing individual programs, I have laid out a set of 10 questions that parents should be asking their child's teachers and school administrators. Feel free to share and or print it out and bring it with you to back to school night. I would love to know what the response is. Okay, so this is going to be really funny, like 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, my kid was in high school and we were like the only family that opted out of Google Classroom. So that tells you, like now, can you imagine trying to opt out of Google Classroom under lockdown, right? They'll just be like, well, then you're not going to school. And, and I will say, and I would just, I'm talking about this smart contract life and my frustration with the fact that so many people, even people I honestly feel like should know better by now, are continuing to focus on crypto, finance, fraud, energy, and blah, 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 but not talking about it within the context of Web3 and the smart contract layer, because this is the stuff that's going to start to be automated. And I know of someone who was telling me that they're in higher education, but I know Canvas is even going down into K-12, that if you were required to do some sort of medical testing protocol, that if you were not like up to speed checking the boxes with your medical, affirmations, attestations, that you would be locked out of Canvas, which is the online learning platform. And you wouldn't be able to log in. So if you were a student, you wouldn't be able to go to school. And if you were a teacher, you wouldn't be able to teach, which is a real problem. And it's kind of embodied, I think at some point last year, Lori Lightfoot, who is the mayor of Chicago, when the teachers didn't want to go back to the classrooms, she just turned off their Google Classroom. And all the teachers went ballistic. They were outraged. They were begging for Google. So this just shows the inversion, that people are so confused about what's really happening. They were literally advocating for Google and being like, how dare you? We hate you that you turned off our Google, which is true. But like they should, because they couldn't teach. But then they needed to revisit actually what education was looking like and how it was going to go. Okay. So question number 1, does the program, the online learning program, require aggregating personally identifiable information from students to function properly? So does the software actually need to know who your kid is to run? right? Does it have a record of like essentially the cognitive model of your child that it needs to fulfill its purpose? Um, and even if it doesn't require it, the personally identifiable information, does it collect it? Okay. And again, the importance of understanding the cognitive model and the interoperable data, the stuff like Clever and the QR codes and the badges, that is going to create the digital twinning. So, I had a couple that was very odd, like who seemed to understand early on the whole situation with educational technology. And when we went out to the Mormon Transhumanist Association conference in Salt Lake City, because it was about blockchain, and blockchain is central to education. Actually, I have a friend who's participating in some sort of panel discussion that's coming up maybe on the weekend about blockchain in education. They said, oh, the transhumanism doesn't even matter. It's not a real thing or whatever. But they were imagining maybe like a cyborg, or like, I'm going to wear a robot arm, or like I'm not sure how they imagine transhumanism, but transhumanism is the digital twin, really. It's you can have a human plus element to it, but you can also, and some of that could even ultimately be nanotechnology or implantable technology. But the next phase is also the digital twin. So you have a physical, maybe human plus, that's a material self, but then you also have a digital avatar. And that's what the interoperability is about. And that's what Clever is going to do, is to use a QR code to pull all the data so that they know kids that interact with their online literacy this way correlates to their online math that way. And they're making all sorts of predictions and patterns out of it. Okay, so does it collect personally identifiable information? And if so, it's learning your kid and putting it into the digital twin world. 2, does the program supplement face-to-face instruction, human instruction, or does it function as a substitute for it? How many minutes per day of face-to-face human interaction is being sacrificed or substituted? And will this lead to increased class sizes? Because what the ed tech people were saying, again, 5-6 years ago, was that the blended hybrid model was meant to be like a 3-part, that you would have small groups, that you would work individually on a device. This is all these cheap Chromebooks that are essentially brain entrainment programs. Then the kid would spend like group time with devices in a small group working on maybe a group project. And eventually that's going to be like, join your global remote work team, and then the third one is you got some time with the teacher. And so maybe the time with the teacher, it was like you and 6 other kids without the device, but that was the thing that was coming. Now imagine like how much over the past 2 years, children have been stuck on devices. Parents have been stuck trying to force kids back on devices who didn't want to be on devices. And the teachers, like all of this, everyone is like, I would think most people by now are really, really sick of these devices. And this all happened, and it was manufactured. It was manufactured to happen this way. So my concern, and again, the people who approached me about maybe talking in advance of their labor contract organizing, I'm like, guys, the teachers are handing it over to the machines. I mean, you've been doing it a long time, and you've been saying that this justifies, differentiation, or like, and I will give this to them. The class sizes are too big. The data analytics requirements are too intense. Like, it's designed to fail. It's designed to force everyone into the metaverse and to break them, really, and to make them submit to manufacture consent for metaverse life. What I told these folks is like, I'm not now actually advocating for neighborhood schools or teachers per se, particularly. I'm fighting AI. I'm fighting globalization 4.0, which is remote robotic platform labor for kids, because schools are going to train kids to accept that. And I find that personally unacceptable. Like, that's no future that I want for anybody's kids, is to have to put their brain in a robot. And, the use case scenarios they're talking about are, look, one person can operate 10 robots in 10 different Walmarts. You can operate 10 robots. And who wants that to be their kid? I mean, Suzanne Giltard is saying, oh, well, the robot can stand outside the shop and wave people in and go, we're having a sale. We're having a sale. And then when the conversation gets too complicated for the AI, a pilot jumps in to the robot and then takes over. But you don't know if you're talking to a person or an AI at any point. And then they pop out, so like that's work. No, that's not. That's none of that is okay. So like when I get frustrated with people who seem to be in the wrong story or promoting the wrong story or intentionally diverting things into stuff that's not going to stop that, like I don't know what to say. That's why I get really exasperated, because to me, if we are not all understanding what's being situated within the globalization 4.0 telepresence labor framework and the amount of data harvest that's connected to that, and what that means for the money people earn, and what that means for the control systems people have to agree to put the brains in the robots and to get the skills badges, and how that's going to affect every aspect of their life, what they can eat, where they can live, what they can wear. Like, that's the thing. And how many people out there are talking about it? I mean, seriously, can anyone chime in the comments? Like, how many people out there are talking about remote haptic labor and digital skills badges and the fact that hedge funds are going to bet on them and that they're going to feed it to the machine? I'm not seeing like a lot of comments, but can you guys help me out? Like, is this a thing? Because like, I'm just not talking, like, why? Like, because I don't think that it's, like, I tell people, that's why I kind of went ballistic, and had to write this big thing with Mr. Immersive Reality Alchemical VR guy, because it's not about Aurora Coin. It's not. It's about sanctuary AI. It's about the UN paper saying they can't wait for the Mexican landscapers to mow yards in Texas from Mexico. What the hell, people? Come on. Like, do we forget? Are we just forgetting all of this? Because this is what school is meant to do, is to train people to accept this as normal. And it's not. And so, I have to say, I think, I'm not trying to be sexist here, but it's the mom. The dads want the kids on the tech. And the moms are the ones standing in the way going, whoa, 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 whoa. And we need to back up the moms. And the moms, you guys need to get organized. And you guys who are working on like the health issues, because again, that's embedded in this community school model, and there'll be another blog post about that. But you need to expand the scope to understand the badging, and you need to understand the social emotional learning stuff and the critical race theory stuff in this context, right? Yes, they want to condition children for these things. And in some ways, I feel that the way those situations were rolled out were meant to inflame and polarize. That doesn't mean that the issues aren't there or that they're not relevant, because they are actually, because like, I don't even know what race looks like in the metaverse, right? Like when you jump into a robot, you have a badge that says what your like your intersectional identities are. Like, I don't even know how that works. But anyway, okay. So please ask your favorite content provider to please just talk about this. And if they're not, if you're giving them money, take it away if they don't. Because at this point, this is the problem. And it's not an ideological problem. Literally, this is the problem of against AI, against natural life and the respect of natural life, not just as individual agency and autonomy, but our interdependence with one another and our interdependence with the natural world. And that's something that we can all care about, no matter what your political background, no matter what your religious background, your cultural background, your racial identity, all of that. Like, that's the thing. So, okay. Number 3. So yeah. And also there was not much face-to-face, right? And that's what makes all the kids depressed and anxious. And that's going to feel, that's what's going to set up the impact markets and mental health. Okay. So 3, does the program encourage active student-to-student engagement and face-to-face discussion? How does it accomplish this? Or does it create an environment where kids are often working in isolation with their devices? How much time are students working alone with devices? Oh, yeah. So, the Bhagavad Gita. I'm in Philadelphia, but my friend Deepti's in Goa. And so she says there's a lot of lessons in here for me about engaging in these massive quests that we're on. Maybe quest. I need to find a better word. You guys can help me out with a better word. It's not quest. It's not battle. It's not, this is our charge, maybe, right? Like, I don't know. That's maybe too electrical. We have shit that we have to get done, right? And she says there's advice for me in here. So if there's advice for me in here, and I trust Deepti then I'm going to read it out loud and maybe y'all will get something out of it too. So I'm going to do that after I read this thing. Okay. So, student to student, do kids get to work together, right? Are they just like, is it like, you have friends, but you're sitting on the couch texting each other? Like, how do we actually have the human to human stuff? Because that's where the power is in the biophotonics, is in all of this. So we need that connection. Like, and I will admit, I will be the first to admit, like, what do they always say, the meme, like, I want my friends from my group projects to come to my funeral so they can let me down one last time. Like, I get it. Like that's also, but that's part of life. That's part of life. That's how you learn to be. So, yeah, well, clearly over lockdowns, kids lost most of their human contact, and that was on purpose, with their teachers and with one another. So what are and another thing is as soon as the kids are on devices, that's learning them. And it's also, I had concerns about, intellectual property. I mean, not that I'm all about like property and money, but once Google Classroom took over all of the classroom emails, like there's backdoor surveillance to, the NSA through Google and their data centers. And then also, like, well, who owns that? You write an amazing research paper, that is your intellectual property, but it's embedded in Google. Like, they can scan it for sentiment analysis. Like, that's a challenge. Okay. So what are the associated costs with respect to your district's budget? Not just the program fees, but the devices required to operate it. And how will participation in the program affect other areas of student experience? Okay, so like, how much money are people actually spending on all this ed tech software and the devices? For example, given the austerity budgets many districts are experiencing, implementing a one-to-one device program to support digital curriculum could impact a school's ability to offer art, or have a librarian, or have extracurriculars, right? And so what's going on with that? There's a finite amount of money. You spend all your money. And the other thing is, this is a subscription model, right? So like my child, again, and they were in a magnet public school. And so this school actually had, they had the same public resources as all the other schools, but they had access to social capital that provided additional financial support. And that's the way it is. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And that was my experience. Even them, their textbooks were maybe 10, sometimes 12, 15 years old, their textbooks, like the math textbooks and the science textbooks. And while you can say that, sure, they may be slightly out of date and there might be some stuff missing, although sometimes the older stuff is actually seems, maybe better. They held up. They were a book. They could be ratty. They might have been drawn on. They might have like lost the back cover, but they were a book. How many Chromebooks do you think last 12 years? How many iPads last 3 years, right? This is a huge e-waste, and they want to sell this to people as green and sustainable. I mean, it's insanity, right? It's not green. It's not sustainable. It's generating a crazy amounts of e-waste. And yet, education, Sustainable Development Goal 3, I think it's either, or maybe it's 4. It's either one is health and one is educate. Maybe it's 4. Yes, we're going to do green technology and we're going to put everybody on an iPad. No, that's for your data harvest. Let's get honest. That's for the data harvest. So, how much money is being spent? Because what they'll do is they'll cut back, they'll push class sizes and then tell teachers, well, you can, we're doing blended learning. So now, you can have 35 kids in the class because half the time they're on the computer anyway. Okay, so how much screen time is involved per day, per week? And consider the health impacts of machine-mediated teaching, especially on elementary age children. Because some of this, like elementary kids just shouldn't be on devices. They really shouldn't. I mean, this idea that somehow you need to teach preschoolers to code, or you need to teach, elementary school kids, they should read with books. They should have books. They should have a library. They should have free choice reading time. Again, I know that literacy is also programming. So I'm not just saying, I was a good reader. I like to read, but, and it is, but create a lot of different options, right? And that's what libraries are for. And that's what we should be doing. It's a very different parts of your brain are different reading from print and reading online. And I've had part of the reason, honestly, that I'm doing this is that, well, 2 things. One, people keep asking me to write a book, which I'm hesitant about. Like, I don't know that I want to stop and write a book. If I wrote a book, it probably would be as a landscape person, some stuff that was, um, attached to place, because that's what I'm interested, to write a book that talks about my experience in Texas, my experience, we're hopefully going to California, my experience in New York, my experience in New Jersey, like surfacing the geography of this cybernetic system and what it looks like in people and places. But I'm not ready to write a book. And so people have me online and they say, it's too hard to read online, like it's strain on my eyes, or I don't have time. So that's why I'm saying it out loud, so you can listen to me while you're watching your dog or washing your dog, walking your dog, feeding your dog, doing the dishes, whatever. That's why I'm here. So, but literacy, they should have a mix, not just be on devices, because the machine knows it can read you. Like all of this, I'm sure it's chowding all of my emotions and, giving me a social score or something from this stupid camera thing. But those machines are watching your kids too, and they're building a profile. Okay, so does the program offer training or education? Because there's a difference. And that's something I talked about when we did a site visit to Virginia Military Institute, is that training someone for chain of command to follow orders and to have enough knowledge to deploy their responsibility is a very different kind of practice than teaching for critical thinking or creative thinking or self-expression. It's very different, and it serves a different purpose, because if you had like military, then and everybody was doing their own thing, like, I think this will be a better way to do it, like you would not win, right? Or you would not prevail in that kind of engagement. But do we want to run our education system broadly and have the next generation trained as chain of command rule followers? And I think maybe that's already been happening in large part, because maybe that accounts for what happened these past couple of years was chain of command thinking and not being able to even conceptualize different things. And that's why, I'm hoping some people will be here, interested in talking to me, because I have a weird brain that got, came up in college on art history and on landscape things. So I have a different lens that I use. But I think we can learn to apply these lenses and learn to exercise that too. Okay, so does the program monitor, tutor, or assess behavior and social emotional learning? So all you guys, like with the social emotional learning stuff, we're just getting on board, like I was talking about in 2016, right? I knew, because they were developing social impact bonds. That was the plan. They were going to develop social impact bonds around behavior. And that was Massachusetts, liberal ass Massachusetts. Like, it's these cloaked liberals who are really a huge problem, and they think they're the best, but they're really not, because they're building the digital empire and they don't even really know at all. Like they won't admit that they're complicit in all of it. But yeah, so social emotional learning, I was at a conference at it was a celebration of SIPRA, the Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results Act, and it was in I don't know, maybe 2017. It was in the Dirksen Senate building in Washington D.C. And I went with a friend, and we were the only two regular people in the room. And they were celebrating the seed money to get all this stuff started, all the Pay for Success finance, all the data infrastructure. And it was like 200 members of nonprofits, every kind of nonprofit you can imagine. And then the main speakers were conservative Republican congressional people, but the panelists were all former Obama policy wonks. And so it was clear to me looking around the room, like, oh, okay, this is how this goes. Like everybody's in on it, right? Everybody's on the gravy train to make this happen. And I got the first question. And so the question I asked this panel, which included the woman who was in charge, now she has her own venture capital firm, but she ran the Goldman Sachs social impact bond for pre-K. And actually she presented on the fact that she was the parent of a special needs child, which to me was really heartbreaking, understanding the way special needs kids are going to be targeted by these investment products and by especially kids on the spectrum with robots. They want to set the kids up with one-on-one robots to mine their personalities and to scan, probably to figure out who's going to be good, for these, like who's high functioning enough that they can use them for pattern recognition. But I asked, the panel, I said, so I know about these social emotional learning impact bonds. In pre-K with the impact bond, the way the deal was set up was that they got pre-K and then the cost offset was special education. So they said these kids were screened to be at risk of needing possibly special education. So when they signed up for kindergarten after a year or two of this Goldman Sachs financed pre-K if they needed special education, like that was factored into the success or not of the deal. And it turns out, guess what? Like of 100 kids, only one of them actually qualified. So even the New York Times said the whole thing was corrupted. But they did it anyway, because really it was just about moving capital for Goldman Sachs. And this woman knew all about that. So I said, well, how does it work with social emotional learning? Because in middle school, the that like say you get a curriculum for anxiety or bullying or something like that, and you get put into a curriculum for social emotional learning. And the guy who developed this, and again, I need the people who are all the conservative moms out there who are yelling about social emotional learning. If you're not incorporating Clive Bellfield's paper on the economic impact of social emotional learning, you're doing it wrong, because it's a global market, not in Marxist brain control. Although I'm not saying they don't want to control your kids' brains. It's about global finance, and it's about digital interventions and mental health and entrainment. And it's for Goldman Sachs et al., the Global Impact Investment Network Impact Management Project. It's for those folks. You need to read the paper. It has the equation that they use to justify all of this, and it is a fiction. So I ask the folks, I say, so tell me, I get it, like with kindergarten, that's the cutoff for pre-K, and then the kids get off the panopticon. But what happens when you have a middle school kid, and the cost offsets are addiction and incarceration? So when do they get to be done being watched? Is that like when they're 21, 28, 35, 52? When do they stop being watched for this social impact deal? If it worked or not? Because those risk categories are something that could follow you throughout. Maybe they're more prominent for young adults, but they could follow you throughout your life. And they didn't have a good answer because they weren't willing to talk about soul-bound tokens yet. Because it was going to be another 3 or 4 years before Vitalik Buterin could usher out the soul-bound token with his the Octopest of Microsoft. And, I can't remember, Pooja Olhaver, the woman of color working on the blockchain, to talk about the amazing thing of tokens. And those tokens, which are essentially blockchain, they're like NFTs, only they're non-transferable. And they can be delivered, awarded, and withdrawn. But they can't be transferred. Once you have it on you, you can't get rid of it. And so it's a tag. It's a metadata tag. And how that's going to work is that for all of these interventions that are happening, whether they be, SNAP benefits on blockchain or social emotional learning or, VR apprenticeships or things, you're going to have a token attached to you that you did it. And at some point, if you get booked for some crime or you end up in rehab, ding, your digital identity, your digital wallet will bring it up, and then all of the deals will be changed up, right? That's how it will happen. They weren't going to tell me that in 2017 when I stood in Washington and asked that question. And I'm sure the people in the room actually knew what the technology was and what it was planned for, because they have the 20-30-year plan. When I went to the Mormon Transhumanist Conference and I found out that the first decentralized ledger was done by Scott Stornetta at Bell Labs in the mid-90s, the whole thing around Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin and everything, it went boof. That's the story to keep everyone busy so that they don't know that the LDS church guy developed the blockchain with the soul-bound tokens. Come on. We need to be talking about this. And I'm not saying Scott Stornetta is a bad guy. I'm sure he thinks he's going to tokenize everyone into optimize their humanity or something. But those are the things that I know that I can't seem to convey to people in a way that they're taking it up and incorporating it into their analysis. So yeah, soul-bound tokens and social emotional learning and behaviors, because guess what? When you're going in the online job TaskRabbit platform for your haptic robotics, steering the robots in the Walmarts, they want to know all of the stacks of credentials of who you are as a person, not just what you know, because they probably want to know the people who know too much. For someone like me, I would be way overqualified for most everything. They would be don't put her on the thing. She knows stuff, right? They want you to not know, because actually with augmented reality, they're going to have these tablets, and I've seen them where you put it in front of the machine and it says, push that button there. Okay, next, do this thing over here. Turn that. Like, and you're supposed to hold the tablet up and it's going to tell you. So they don't want you to know how the machine works. They don't want you to be able to build a machine. They just want you to show up and do what the machine tells you to do. You are a servant of the machine in a way well beyond what was even imagined by Henry Ford. And I would encourage you, maybe I'll put a link to it again, like I did a really good podcast conversation with the What's Left guys about Fordism and Diego Rivera. And there's some images of the assembly lines and where that's going. But, you know, yeah, that's what the tokens are for, is that it's for the betting, for the tagging, and for the badging to qualify people for digital platform work. Okay. Assuming the program is used during the school day, what is the program replacing? And what aspect of instruction formerly offered will be eliminated if this program is implemented? Okay. So, you know, in the Heckman conference on social emotional learning, the guy's like, you know, I'm trying to make the parents use this pre-K app with their kids, but they say they're going to do it, but then they never do. And it's terrible. And Heckman's like, oh man, you just don't have a good incentive. You need an incentive like pornography. Like that's Heckman's response, right? But he's like, man, I really want the parents to use this, but they say there's no time in the day to use this app. And like, we all know how overbooked we are, right? And so there isn't time. So if you're doing something online, it means that something you wouldn't have done online went away. Now, it might be hard at this point to even imagine what that looks like because all of school is online, right? Like we're all doing everything online all the time. But that stuff went away. Like there's hardly a public school kid in Philadelphia that has access to art, has access to choir, has access to extramural sports. That stuff all went away. And it went away on purpose. And it went away to community partners, because those community partners are going to be the people who they're going to get they're going to take your blockchain vouchers and they're going to collect your character tokens, because actually what they've said is that they want, like, especially with wearable technology, once we move into wearables, having those, like the arts and the drama and the sports and the chess and the robots leagues all being done by nonprofits, that makes it much easier for them to do it in with pay for success finance. That's bottom line, right? And so all of the libertarians and the conservatives who are like, give me, you know, choice and blah, 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 blah. Well, they don't realize that once there are government-backed vouchers and people are taking them into their communities to pay for the makerspace and to go into the library for the cooking. Like, why does the Philadelphia Free Library has a whole third floor that's a kitchen? That doesn't make any sense. Like, they're shrinking the books. They take the books away. They jettison the books. They empty all of the central library stacks and they throw a kitchen up there, because that's for healthy eating. And again, like, I love a cooking class. I love healthy eating. I love farm boxes. I love these things. It doesn't need to be in the library. It's only in the library because they want it for the impact metrics, so that they can figure out as who's like doing sous chefing of vegetables, like who has the best knife skills, you know, and who's the good team player and who's the leader and who's the follower and all this stuff. Like all of that stuff is being tracked. And so the machine needs people as learning agents in diverse environments. They can't get it. Having 30 kids sit in a classroom isn't enough data for the complex machine learning. Now that they're getting the quantum and they're getting the high-powered processing, they can get the machine learning. So they need everyone creating emotional data, movement data, biometric data to feed the system's complexity, right? A bunch of kids sitting for like 6 hours a day with a Chromebook, that's not a lot of, I mean, it's some data, but it's not as much as if you put a wearable on them and send them out in the city and track them and see how they interact with each other, because those relationships are what they really want. So anyway, what I'm saying is the vouchers, once they come, and I think I think a lot of the conservatives and the libertarians at the tippy top know that this is the plan, that once the vouchers come and the acceptance comes, anyone who takes it, that data will be sent back. It will be integrated into the badge program and the children's data. And they will say it's private. Oh, we're just doing it private. Don't worry. But the reality is, in digital identity, look up the secret network. It came out of Enigma protocol, which was incubated by MIT. Now it's MIT with In-Q-Tel. And so what they can say is they can query unencrypted data, that it's private, but for the purposes of impact finance, they can pull out the metadata tags to know if the kids who went to the library cooking class, how long it was before they hit some health target on pre-diabetic screening. because they've got those soulbound token tags in there. And that's how it was always meant to work. And they will say that you have privacy, but it's not. Like, I mean, honestly, I don't, that's the false herring, because like I don't want to have privacy and be a data commodity. And I don't want to have to live my whole life in a panopticon so that Goldman Sachs can run their global capital through my body or my children's body, to harvest our emotions to train AI. Like, I just refuse that entire concept, that entire premise. I don't want that to be private. I don't want it to exist at all. Like, we have to say we don't want that to exist at all. Okay, so yeah, so what's going to be jettisoned if you take on this tech? How does adopting a blended hybrid learning program, which has been developed by outside interests, impact local control and autonomy within your school and district? What percentage of instructional time is being turned over to outsourced online education that's going to result in your neighborhood school no longer being your school, right? And so that's really important to think about. When you are buying into a corporate curriculum, they're running your school. Like, you're handing, like, I mean, and this was back in the day. I don't even know what it is now, right? Like Dreambox, Pearson, Achieve 3000. Those people who are fighting for local control to have, and this is what's so ironic, because they want to talk about like culturally responsive curriculum. And yet, like, they're going to have like it in a box. Like, here's your corporate box of culturally responsive, like, curriculum, like delivered straight to you by the AI. It's not culturally responsive because it's totally disconnected from actual communities. It's not that, right? It's not yours. You didn't make it. It's not reflective of you. And the reason is they need everything homogenized because they're going to make your kids compete against the kids in Singapore. They don't want you to be culturally distinct and think for yourself. You have to think like everybody else. How are you going to fit in the hive mind if you don't think like everybody else? And, it's hard because on the one hand, like, there are these narratives of, extremism or exclusion or bullying. And I don't mean to say that those things don't happen. Like, yeah, people are a mess. Like, I've been living through this stuff. Like, people can be a real handful, right? Like, people can be difficult, but the reality is like, we wouldn't want everybody exactly the same, because if we were all the same, like, we wouldn't need so many of us, right? Like, we all have different gifts. So yeah. So how much of your curriculum, how much of your school day are you handing over to corporate actors? That's where it's at. And like, soon it's going to be run on the AI, and soon it may not even be, individual companies, because what's moving forward is what's called open education resources, that itself comes with all these metadata tags. And when you engage in an OER, it collects information about you. And then it tags you with the information. So, and that was developed largely with Hewlett Packard. And Hewlett Packard, clearly, like, they're doing biometric border control and all sorts of pharmaceuticals and human capital analysis with analytics. So, sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. There's like a big helicopter outside. So that's the first one. And, I talk so much. I think I'm just going to do one and read a little bit of this other stuff, because we're already at an hour, and I'm going to try to keep these guys a little bit shorter. But so I'm going to start this next thing. And maybe by the end of reading it, I'll get better. Maybe this is my task. The Bhagavad Gita. Move my mouth up. Okay. And this is a translation by the author Sage Veda Vyasa, translated by Ramananda Prasad. Now, this is a tiny thing. I think I told Jason, and he's like, I have that book. It's 600 pages. So it's clearly not that book. But Deepti says that this is one that's used a lot over there. And like, if you follow me, you know that my frame is that this is a spiritual thing. This is like a spiritual engagement, but like, I don't pick a religion at this point. Like, and I don't really align with the fact that like you do you authentically, hold your institutions accountable, because this thing is coming after all of it, and it's embedded in all of the faith-based traditions. And increasingly, this is really interesting. Some of the work that I've been doing, and I don't know if you listened to my podcast yesterday, I touch on it just a tiny bit, but there's this idea of the inner light and sort of mystical religious faith practice, whether that be like Christian, Qigong, yogic practice, Vedic, that you have this energy. And I think that energy is something that they want to connect with in that piezoelectric energy harvest. It's really crazy. Like I have this whole like picture of all these like rats that they've opened up their hearts and put these weird sensors on them for their heartbeat. For they say it's to power wearables, and I think ultimately it's really going to be that your wearable will eventually be implanted, and then when you interface with the Web3, like it's very low power. Like the stuff is edge computing is very low power, and a lot of it is solar or like self-powering. And so you need to power your own wearable so that you can interface with Web3. And so I think that the piezoelectric, which is if that is your sweat, if that is your heat, if that is like your blinking, if your throat swallowing, all of these things, but the heart is also part of it. They want the heart. They want that energy, and they want the spiritual energy too. And so a lot of that is linked to like light and spirit and the seed. And there's connections to the Unitarians and to the Quakers and the Shakers and all of this stuff. So, so there is something to the capture of the natural circuits. Okay. So, all right. So I'm just going to read the introduction on this. It says, and this is just abbreviated, but I trust that DP wouldn't steer me wrong. Okay. Let noble thoughts come to us from everywhere. The Vedas. Okay. And I would say that's a really important starting point, because I've been navigating some bumpy waters lately. And I would say, like, my friend Cliff is always like, what are you listening to? Is it kind? You have the power to change your story, the story that you're occupying. So I think like we should aspire to noble thoughts, right? We should aspire to putting the energy that's out, something that not necessarily noble as in royal, but just like a moral uplifting thought. Because imagine what would happen if we all started to live in stories where we were realized, like integrated beings full of love and self-confidence. That would be great. Okay. Introduction. The Bhagavad Gita is a doctrine of universal truth and a book of moral and spiritual growth. Its message is sublime and non-sectarian. It deals with the most sacred metaphysical science. Now, I will just say, I don't know where yesterday, part of what I was talking about was all the metaphysics that these crazy bonker people are trying. So the metaphysics is really important, including that guy, Zane Griffin Talley Cooper, who is all about alchemy. Okay, it deals with the most sacred metaphysical science. It imparts the knowledge of the self and answers two universal questions. Who am I, and how can I lead a happy and peaceful life in this world full of dualities and dilemmas? Yes, dilemmas. It is a timeless book of wisdom that inspired Thoreau, Emerson, Einstein, Oppenheimer, Gandhi, and others. I don't know. Just food for thought. Okay. I don't know that. Maybe they had the wrong takeaway. All right, let's see. The Bhagavad Gita teaches us how to equip ourselves for the battle of life. A repeated study with faith purifies our psyche and guides us to face the challenges of modern living, leading to inner peace and happiness. I can get on board with that. Gita teaches the spiritual science of self-realization based on the essence of Upanishads and Vedanta. The prime message of the Gita is the ultimate purpose of life is to realize one's essential nature and become one with the supreme self within all of us. It assures spiritual progress for all humans and how to be one with the supreme. The teachings are profound, universal, uplifting, and sublime. The ignorance of metaphysical or spiritual knowledge, not knowing our real identity, is humanity's greatest predicament. It is said that there is no human mind that cannot be purified by repeated study of the Gita. Gita explains the basic principles of spiritual science using Sanskrit poetry in a very clear and inspiring manner. Sacred relationship between the creator and the creation is well established in the Gita. If one lives in the spirit of even a few verses of the Gita, one's life will be transformed into divinity. The philosophy of duty, devotion, and self-knowledge is wonderfully synthesized and harmonized in the Gita, without creating any conflict among them, to give the reader eternal bliss, everlasting peace, and perennial joy in life. It awakens cosmic consciousness and stimulates life with spirituality. Religion tends to create a wall of division and conflicts along religious lines, whereas spirituality unites people by breaking those walls. So that's nice. A spiritual person is a friend of all and a foe of none. because he considers all creatures, living or non-living, as part and parcel of the cosmic body of the absolute, of the source. The message of the Gita came to humanity due to Arjuna's unwillingness to do his duty as a warrior, because fighting involved destruction and killing. Nonviolence, or ahimsa, is one of the most fundamental tenets of spiritual culture. All lives, human or non-human, are sacred. The immortal discourse between the Supreme Lord Krishna and his devotee friend Arjuna occurs not in a temple, a secluded forest, or on a mountaintop, but on a battlefield on the eve of a big war. Anyone can be helped by practice of only a few of its teachings. No change of faith or lifestyle is needed. A total of 700 verses of the Gita in 18 chapters are recorded in the world's longest epic, Mahabharata, having over 100,000 verses in Sanskrit poetry. In Gita, Lord Krishna advises Arjuna to get up and fight. This may create a misunderstanding of the principles of nonviolence if the background of the war of Mahabharata is not kept in mind. Therefore, a brief historical description is in order. In ancient times, there was a king who had two sons, Dhritarashtra and Pandu. The former was born blind. Therefore, Pandu inherited the kingdom. And Pandu had 5 sons, and they were called the Pandavas. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons, and they were called the Kauravas. Duryodhana was the eldest of the Kauravas. And after the death of King Pandu, the eldest son of Pandu became the lawful king. And Duryodhana was a very jealous person, and he also wanted the kingdom. The kingdom was divided into 2 halves between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Duryodhana was not satisfied with his share of the kingdom. He wanted the entire kingdom for himself, and he unsuccessfully planned several foul plays to kill the Pandavas and take away their kingdom. Also, he unlawfully took possession of the entire kingdom of the Pandavas and refused to give back even an acre of land without a war. All mediation by Lord Krishna and others failed, and the big war of Mahabharata was thus inevitable. The Pandavas were unwilling participants. They had only 2 choices: fight for their right as a matter of duty, or run away from war and accept defeat for the sake of peace and nonviolence. Arjuna, one of the 5 Pandava brothers, faced his dilemma in the battlefield, whether to fight or run away from war for peace. Arjuna's dilemma is, in reality, the universal dilemma. All human beings face dilemmas, big or small, in their everyday life while performing their duties. Arjuna's dilemma was a big one. He had to make a choice between fighting the war and killing his most reverend guru, who was on the other side. Very dear friends, close relatives, and many innocent warriors are running away from the battlefield for the sake of preserving peace and nonviolence. The entire 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita are a discourse between Lord Krishna and the confused Arjuna on the battlefield near New Delhi in India in 3139 BCE. This discourse was narrated to a blind king, Dhritarashtra, by his charioteer Sanjaya as an eyewitness war report. The word Bhagavad means the supreme being, God, or Bhagavan in Sanskrit. Gita means song. Thus, Bhagavad Gita means the song of God, or the celestial song, because it was sung by Bhagavan, Lord Krishna, an incarnation of God himself. Okay, so I'm trying to think. I think I'm going to wait and just stop with the introduction today, and we'll do chapter 1 the next time, and I'll read just a little bit from Feed, the M.T. Anderson. All right, I'll work on that. That'll be part of my work. So Feed was from 2002, so it's 20 years old already. All right, so we shall remember this, and it's set in a future dystopia of like climate blah blah blah, where everyone has a feed installed in their brain and they just get all of it. And yeah, it's like this high school. It's like high school kids. This is a young adult novel for high school kids, and it starts out with an Auden poem. Oh dear white children, casual as birds playing among the ruined languages, so small beside their large, confusing words, so gay against the greater silences of dreadful things you did. From the Anthem for St. Cecilia's Day, W.H. Auden. Okay, contents. Part 1, Moon. Moon. Your face is not an organ. We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck. We went on a Friday because there was shit all to do at home, and it was the beginning of spring break. Everything at home was boring. Like Link Arkwater was like, I'm so null. And Marty was all, I'm null too, unit. But I mean, we were all pretty null because like for the last hour, we'd been playing with 3 uninsulated wires that were coming out of the wall. We were trying to ride shocks off of them. So Marty told us that there was this fun place for low grav on the moon. Low grav can be kind of stupid, but this was supposed to be good. It was called the Ricochet Lounge, and we thought we'd go for a few days with some of the girls and stay at a hotel there and go dancing. We flew up, and our feeds were burbling all sorts of things about where to stay and what to eat. It sounded pretty fun. And at first, there were a lot of pictures of dancing and people with romper gills and metal wings. And I was like, this will be big, really big. But then I guess I wasn't so skip when we were flying over the surface of the moon itself, because the moon was just like it always is after your first few times there, when you get over being like, whoo, unit, the moon, the goddamn moon. And instead, there's just rockiness and the suckiness and the craters all being full of old broken shit like domes nobody's using anymore and wrappers and claws. The thing I hate about space is that you can feel how old and empty it is. I don't know if the others felt like I felt about space, but I think they did because they all got louder. They all pointed more and squeezed close to Link's windows. You need the noise of your friends in space. I feel really sorry for people who have to travel by themselves. In space, that must suck. When you're going places with other people, with this big group, everyone is leaning towards each other and people are laughing and they're chatting and things are great. And it's like in a commercial for jeans or something with nougat. To make some noise, Link started to move his seat up and back to whack Marty's knees. I was like trying to sleep for the last few minutes of the flight because there was nothing to see except broken things in space. And when we were going hard, I got real sleepy, real easy. And I didn't want to be null for the units on the moon, at the hotel if any of them were youch. I guess if I'm honest, well, then I was hoping to meet someone on the moon. Maybe part of it was the loneliness of the craters. But I was feeling like it was maybe time to hook up with someone again because it had been a couple of months, and at parties I was starting to get real lonely, even when there were other people around me, and it's worse when you leave. And then there's that silence when you're driving home alone in the up car, and there's nothing but this feed telling you, this is the music you heard. This is the music you missed. This is what's new. Listen. And it would be good to have someone to download with. I mean, it would be good to have someone on the up car with you flying home with the lights underneath you and the green faces of mothers that you can see halfway through the windows of the dropping vans. And as we flew across the surface of the moon, I couldn't sleep. Link was playing with the seat like an asshole. He was moving it forward and backwards, and Marty had dropped his bird, these fake birds that were the big spit, and lots of people had them. And Marty's bird was floating off, because there was hardly any gravity. And whenever he leaned to get out his bird, Link would slam his seat back like meg hard, and it would go bam on Marty's face. And then they would just start laughing, and Marty would all be like, unit, just wait one. And then Link would be like, go for it, try it. And Marty would be like, unit, you're so. And then they would all be big laughing. And I felt like a complete bone sprocket for trying to sleep when there was fun. And I kept hoping the waitress lady would say something and make them shut for a minute. But as soon as we got out of Earth's gravitational zone, she had gone all gaga over the duty free. I didn't want to be sleeping like all stupid, but I'd been drinking pretty hard the night before, and I'd been in a mal, and I was feeling kind of like shit. So it was not a good way to start this whole trip to the moon, with the seat thumping on Marty's face and him going, unit, I'm trying to get my bird. And Link was saying, go for it. Marty went, Link, whacker, shit. You're like doing all this mag damage to my knees and my face. Kiss the chair, pucker up. And they both started laughing. Okay, said Marty. Okay, just tell me which of my friggin' organs you're going to smash this time. Keep your tray in the upright position. Like what organ? Just tell me. Those aren't organs. What do you mean? Your face is not an organ. My face is to an organ. It's alive. Oh my God. Is there enough oxygen? Said our friend Callista, because you are having some kind of neuron death. I'm trying to sleep, Loga complained. She yawned. I'm flatlining, Meg. And then there was this wham, and Marty was all, oh shit, holding onto his face. And I sat up and I was like completely there was no hope of sleeping with these morons doing rumpus on my armrest. And the waitress came by and Link stopped and smiled at her. And she was like, what a nice young man. And that was because he purchased like a slop bucket of cologne from the duty free. I'm going to just do one more because I'm supposed to do a phone call. So impact, this is chapter 2. Impact, perfect, right? So I was tired and pissy from the get-go. When we got off the ship, our feeds were going fugue with all the banners. The hotels were jumping on each other, and there was bump like the casinos and mudslides and the gift shops and places where you could rent extra arms. I was trying to talk to Link, but I couldn't because I was getting bannered so hard. I kept blinking and trying to walk forward with my carry-on. I can hardly remember any of it. I just remember everything in the banners looking goldy and sparkly. But as we walked down to the luggage, all the air vents were streaked black. The whole time was like that. The moon went on and on. It was me and Marty and Link and Callista and Loga and Quendi. And the 3 girls had one hotel and the 3 boys had the other room. And there were a lot of people there for break. And kids were all leaping up and down the halls and making their voices echo. It was a pretty crummy hotel. And there weren't enough sheets. And there was hardly any gravity. And no one had a fake ID. So they put the lock on the minibar. And I was like, this is a crummy hotel. But Marty was all, unit, this is where I stayed last time. It's meg cheap. And all the staff are made from a crystalline substance. Our feeds were clear again from all the moon banners. And so for a long time, we all watched the football game while the girls, they did something else on the feed. They were chatting each other and we couldn't hear them, but they kept laughing and touching each other's faces. And I wanted to go to sleep, but every time I tried, bam, Link and Marty would suddenly go all fission on me saying, Titus, did you fucking see that? Did you see Hemaker? I tried to tell myself that being here was not re-sleeping, but being with your friends and doing great stuff. And I tried to concentrate on all the stimulus and the fun of it. But there was not always too good fun, though. We ordered some fancy nutrient IVs from room service, but they gave us all headaches. And then we went out to this place that Marty said served the best electrolyte chunkies, but it had closed a year before. It was dinner time, so we had dinner at J.P. Barnigan's family extravaganza, which was pretty good, and just like the one at home. And we got some potato skins for appetizers. It was at least good to get out of the hotel because most of the rest of the city had pretty good artificial gravity. So if you drop things, at least they fucking fell. It was almost like normal, which is how I like it. And then we went back to the hotel. There were parties there, but it was mostly college kids. Usually we can get in because me and Link and Marty and Callista, and we can turn on the charm. Callista's blonde, and so she can do this like sorority girl ice princess thing, which she does with her voice and her shoulder blades, which makes people think she's older than she is and really important. And Link is tall and ugly, but he's really rich. And that kind of old rich, that's like radiation. So that always gets in invisible waves. And people are suddenly like, unit, hey, unit. And they want to be guys with him. And, you know, Marty, the thing is, he's good at anything, any game. And so I just stand there silent and I act cool. And we're this trio and the 3 of us guys being like total guys, which makes people let us in and give us a beer. But that didn't work this time. We tried to get in and we were standing in the doorway and they were all like, who the hell are you? And we looked at ourselves and we looked kind of bad. We were tired and sleepy. And even though we're all pretty good looking, except Link, we were all pale and our hair was greasy and we had the lesions that people were getting. And ours were right, but then they were red and wet looking. And Link had a lesion on his jaw and I had lesions on my arm and on my side. And Quendi had a lesion on her forehead. And in the lights of the hallway, you could see them real good. And there were different kinds of lesions. I mean, there was lesions and lesions, but somehow our lesions in this case seemed like kid stuff. And later on, after some showers, we went to the Ricochet Lounge. It was very low grav, no grav, and it was all about whamming one person into another in big stuffed suits. The place had been hip like a year and a half ago. The slogan was, slam the ones you love. And now the place was just old and sad. The walls were all marked up from people hitting them. Even with his impact helmet on, Link stood out. He's much taller than anyone else because he's part of a secret patriotic experiment. In low gravity, his arms seemed like they were everywhere. He swung them around and spun. And I was being a little careful when I ran into the other people because of the arm lesion. It had broke open and was oozing. Still, it was pretty fun at first, launching ourselves on the walls and going like, woo, and hitting other people and wrestling while floating on the floor. And I was watching Loga real close. She and I had gone out about 6 months before until we had this big argument. And then it was like this big thing. And she was like, I never want to see you again. And I was like, fine, okay, fine. And then got some special goggles. But we were friends, which was good. And I think it's always really limp when guys can't talk to girls they went out with. Plus, I was thinking that maybe Logan and I could hook up again if we find anyone else, like if we didn't find anyone else, like on the moon or whatever. And I didn't have a thing for Callista or Quendi or even completely a thing anymore for Loga, but I was watching Link slamming into them. And when he slammed, it said that he and the girls all knew what each other's bodies would be like. And that was part of the game. And I was unhappy because Logan and I had been a dyad. And now when I ran into her in high speeds, it wasn't anything like it was when Link ran into her at high speeds. And I thought she and I should have a little secret way of collusion, but usually we sailed right past each other. And Marty, who can do anything good, he was off in the corner doing gymnastics in the mid chair. He had a ball and he was kicking it in a circle so it came back to his foot. And Link said, "Over here." And Marty popped the ball to him and he kicked it to me. And for a while we played a game with the ball and we were twirling all over the place. We were like, what's it called when you skim really close over the surface of something? We were to the floor and our arms out. But of course, Marty started winning all the time. And Link, he doesn't like to lose. He was like, "This isn't all. This sucks." "Pass," said Marty. "What's fucking doing? This place sucks," says Link. Marty said, "Give it a chance, unit." But Link was like, "No, play by yourself. Play with yourself." And then suddenly everything seemed really stupid. And then I saw someone watching. I wasn't glad. I looked again, and she was the most beautiful girl like ever. And she was watching our stupidity. And there was a valve that led into the food bar. She was in the valve. She had her crash helmet under her arm, and she had this short blonde hair, and her face, it was like, I don't know, it was beautiful. It wasn't just the way, I guess, it wasn't just the way it looked, but also how she was standing with her arm. And I just stared at her. Getting some Meg food on the food bar, and the pot stickers were really cheap. And I stood there wondering what it was that made her so beautiful. And she was looking at us like we were shit. Her spine, well, maybe it was her spine. I don't know. It wasn't her face. Her spine was like, I don't know the word. Her spine was like, the feed suggested, supple. And then it has sort of this like little chunky stuff here. So I'm going to just read that. Attracted to powerful T44 fermion lift with vertical rise, I think these might be ads, of 50 feet per second. And if you like comfort, quality, and class, the supple upholstery and ergonomically designed dash will leave you something like hysterical. But the best thing about it is the financing at 18.9% APR. Only Sports Fox takes a gas sled, takes chlorine storm on Jupiter, and boys, it's time to spit into the wind with Alex Needham, the hardest, hippest, hypest. Month summer styles, and the word on the street is squeaky. Their hit single, Bad Me, Bad You, I like you so bad, and you like me so bad, we are so bad. It would be bad if we did not get together today, baby. Bad baby, bad, bad baby, Meg bad. ... Hostess, M's American Family Restaurants, where time seems to stop while you chew. Okay, so I think I will stop there. Next time we come back, it will start with juice. So anyway, thanks for hanging out to my assortment hip hop podcast. If you find other people out there calling me unstable, I don't know that that's the right adjective. Maybe they should go back to their feed and find a new one. Maybe quirky, or maybe energetic or insightful, but probably not unstable. All right. Be well, everyone. Bye.